Hello, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Martin Spolz. I am the head of Sustainable Finance Unit at the European Commission, Directorate General for Financial Services. It's my great honor to welcome you at this exciting panel on transition finance. Over the last 5 years, the European Union has made enormous progress on developing a taxonomy that is defining what economic projects are sustainable. We have done a great progress on the transparency and on enhancing transparency by the financial sector and the corporates. And we have developed a number of tools that are supposed to help companies and the financial market participants to move the needle on the ground. We have been talking a lot about what is sustainable and what needs to be financed in terms of sustainable investment. But most recently, there has been a lot of interest in talking about transition finance, how to finance not only what is green today, but also what, in the first place, what to do in terms of financing not stuff that is not yet green today, but what needs to become green. And it's my great pleasure to have a dedicated, great panel of experts. I am joined by four. First, Nancy Sash, who is the Chief Climate Change Expert at the European Investment Bank. Then I am here joined in the studio by Wilfried Remans, the Head of Network of Experts in Sustainability Transitions Nest at the BNP Paribas. Then we have Ignacio Real de Astua, Head of Capital Markets and Financial Risk Management at Iberdrola. And we have Laurent Babikian, Director of Capital Markets at CDP Europe. In the interest of time, I will not go into the very long introduction of the speakers. I have identified 4 key issues that I would like to elaborate on this panel. The first one is how does transition finance actually fits into a broader picture of investment in sustainable? How does transition finance actually fit in the overall framework of financing what is green today and what needs to become greener? Do we need any framing for transition finance? Can it be whatever? The second cluster of this panel is about taxonomy and how can taxonomy be used as a useful transition tool. The third cluster will be about what other tools and instruments to use and how robust and credible transition plans in particular should look like. And the fourth cluster will be about how to improve SMEs' access to transition finance. So let me start with the first cluster, which is about whether transition finance need any framing. The European Commission in June earlier this year presented a recommendation on transition finance in which we have articulated how the overall framework supports the needs of companies to finance their green transition and also how it supports the financial market participants. And in this recommendation, the European Commission articulated a number of specific recommendations what the companies can do to attract transition finance. And we have also articulated a number of recommendations what the financial sector can do to design appropriate financing innovations. In this piece, we also have clearly defined the transition finance, but I would be interested to hear from the panelists whether they agree that there is a need to frame transition finance, whether it can be whatever, and how do you see the Commission recommendation? Do you think that we got the balance right between the framing and flexibility? So I would start first with Wilfried. I mean, what are the views at BNP Paribas?
Yeah. Thank you, Martin, for having us here. I think indeed, if you don't frame transition finance, you risk killing green finance. If you have whatever in there, you might undermine the credibility of sustainable finance at large, and it might undermine the credibility towards the investors. And in my view, you can work alongside 2 ways to do this framing. On the one side is how do you exclude certain sectors or certain companies based on certain criteria. That's on the one side. For instance, you could say we don't see at BNP Paribas a transition happening at the tobacco sector, at the sector of shale and oil gas specialists, tar sand specialists. We're stepping out of the sector of electricity based on coal. That's on a sector level. Then if you go to the company level, also there, we dare to exclude companies in certain sensitive sectors that cannot live up to certain minimum environmental or social criteria. Think about defense, agriculture, nuclear, palm oil. If a palm oil company doesn't respect the highest norms in terms of palm oil production, we will not finance them anymore. So this is one side, for me, of the coin. The other side of the coin is, okay, does it mean that any other activity we finance can be considered as transition finance? I think there we're looking, for instance, in terms of capital raising to the guidance that has been provided by the International Capital Markets Association, ICMA, which defines you don't have to only look to the activity in itself, but look to the whole picture. How does it fit into the strategy of a company? Is the strategy of the company, is it working with the material activities? Is there a scenario, and in particular for hard to abate sectors, how do they govern the capital allocation? Is it really going to the activities that gradually will make a company that is not green for now, it's not going to be green in the near future, but at least it's going to bring it in the right direction?
Thank you very much also for being disciplined. I mean, I should remind all the speakers that we have been allocated 1 hour and this topic is very exciting, but we should really be disciplined to speak for about two minutes each. Ignacio, I would come to you. Do you think that we need framing for transition finance?
Well, I think in this topic, Europe has demonstrated its ambition and is becoming a real leader of the world, being the first in setting up a wide regulation that intends to cover all the angles involved. A green taxonomy was anything needed to determine the activities that we want to need to encourage, and Europe has already elaborated. Market agents and end user will rely on the sustainability finance disclosure regulation, which fulfills the taxonomy by demanding investors transparency in reporting that activities they are financing. This is probably one of the challenges right now, to get a final regulation that provides investors with the information they need to make their decision. Issuers will adopt the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive and standards so that companies will be transparent and non-financial information, risk, opportunities, and impacts that they are managing in terms of sustainability. Important developments have also taken place in terms of ESG ratings and external verifications, which is another pillar that helps ensuring assurance. And now we are going to have the rules to issue in green format under the European Union Green Bond Standard, ensuring the rigor and avoiding the risk of greenwashing. We have set up the tools there, but of course it's still too early to conclude this trip. And now we need to work all together to ensure all this works, everything matches, and there is a continuity in the world market.
Thank you very much. Nancy, I would come to you. You have been very active on transition finance and you have advised the European Commission on these matters extensively. And by the way, you also have influenced a lot of Commission thinking here. What is the EIB stake on transition finance? Do we need framing for transition finance? And also, is there a need to say what transition finance is not?
Yes, thank you very much for inviting the EIB onto this panel. And you know that transition finance is one of my favorite topics. So I think you absolutely got it right, starting with green finance, and that includes green transition finance. So there's quite a lot in the taxonomy that's green transition. But I think moving to look at this wider transition is absolutely right. And that's something we see at the EIB. We have a target to exceed 50% green, but everything else that we finance has to be Paris aligned, has to be compatible with environmental goals and with our environmental and social standards. So it's our job as a public bank to help those entities transition their activities. And even if they're not green, that is part of our job. I think the other thing that the EU got right, which in fact we've now reflected in our lending, is that you chose to look at all 6 objectives in green, so not just climate. So a lot of transition finance discussion is still about mitigation, but from the very beginning, you obviously saw that there was a wider transition needed, and that indeed was the work in the platform. We said, okay, we need to look at all 6 objectives, so moving to a more circular economy, moving away from irreversible damage to biodiversity. All these things are very important as well. Obviously, we want things to go to a better, greener place in the end, but at the moment, there's this really big need to transition away from things that are harmful. The other thing the bank is doing, which supports this and I think fits in, is that in our path framework, and we're going to come back to that a bit later, which is our Paris alignment for counterparts, we've looked at mitigation and resilience. And we're asking for mitigation and resilience plans where needed. And I think that's really important. I think far too often we're forgetting about the need to transition to a more climate resilient world. And that's really reinforced here at COP. This is something that has to happen right now. And business is actually often very vulnerable to climate change impacts. So we must remember that part.
Thank you, Nancy. Laurent, now to you. In the European Commission, we have provided this clarity through the recommendation on transition finance. We provided some framing, but at the same time, we wanted to provide for some flexibility. What are your views? I mean, did we get it right? Is there the right balance between, again, on the one hand, flexibility and also the framing on the other hand? I mean, is it too tight? Is it too loose? Thank you. I am afraid that we cannot hear you, Laurent. I mean, I don't know if you are muted.
Sorry. Yeah, you got me now? Yeah, you can hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, I think in your guidelines, you make a differentiation between companies that have a transition plan and companies that have a science-based target, and one is included in the transition plan. So science-based target is a subsegment of transition plan. So I wouldn't make that distinction. Because the winning combo is to have a science-based target and a transition plan explaining how you're going to achieve the target. That's for climate, but it would be valid also for water and for all the other 4 elements that we have in the taxonomy. And yes, I think there is a need to have a clear definition of what transition finance is, because we saw what happened with Article 8 and Article 9. There was a problem with the notion of sustainable investment. What is a sustainable investment? So we need to give definition of that. And then ultimately, we will need, and this is my wish, to have a clear definition on the top of everything about the fiduciary duty of an investor, so that everybody is working at the same level with the same book of definition and working at the same level to make the flow, the flow of investment shift from brown to green assets.
Thank you very much. So I take from this first discussion that there is a need for framing. So there is a need to deepen the conversation further on how this framing should look like, because everybody is using slightly different framing. But this is already very encouraging to conclude that all of you think that some kind of framing needs to be done. Let us go to the second cluster, which is my favorite cluster, which is about taxonomy and the role that taxonomy can play in the transition process, and how taxonomy can help drive conversations between the companies and the financial sector. As you know, the European Union has designed the taxonomy not only as a useful classification tool and also disclosure tool, but in the first place as a useful transition tool that, in our view, should ultimately be one of the key tools to drive decisions within the firms, within the companies, within the financial market sector, to drive the decisions on what to finance and how to quickly become more sustainable. So Nancy, I would start with you. I mean, as I mentioned, you have been, instrumental in the work that you have done yourself in advising the Commission on how taxonomy can be powerful in driving not only disclosures, but in driving the decisions making throughout the transition process. Can you tell us more about the concepts and the recommendations that you have put forward?
Yes. And firstly, I mean, it's very kind of you, Martin, but in fact, subgroup 3 in the platform was very much more than myself. We had one of pretty much every kind of organization you might want to have in the sustainable finance discussion. So we had, a bank, a company, an NGO, a think tank, a university, etc. We had a huge amount of public outreach and engagement. And the end result, I think, although it's obviously the whole platform's recommendations, is testament to the enormous work done by subgroup 3. And yes, I was very happy to lead that group. I'm going to pinch a bit of time for this question. I promise to do the next one really, really quickly. I think what the platform said was a number of different things. And obviously, those of you that are interested, please do have a look at the report, which is called the Extended Taxonomy, sometimes called the Transition Taxonomy. It is not about social transition, although that is important. It is about environmental transition. And it starts with the question, what is not green? And then we started to look at, well, what is needed? What finance needs to flow for transition across the whole economy? So you have to distinguish between activities that cannot transition, that have no technological opportunity, like thermal coal mining, but that's not the only activity. And then you have to think, how can that be closed down in a managed way, taking account of social impacts. But in the big emitting or big impactful sectors, you have to think about, well, what about the 90% perhaps that's not green at the moment? Some of that is perhaps working towards being green, but some of it is really in need of a major transition so that it will get to a performance level where it is doing no significant harm to the objective. And that may not be possible for that activity to go on to green immediately or even ever, perhaps in some cases, but it's super important. Now, we gave that a color, you know what it is, Martin, it's amber transition, but I don't think it matters what color you give it. What matters is that finance flows, and that the really important thing is to say that a small improvement is not a good enough transition. We're here at the COP with a 1.5 degrees temperature goal almost off the table, and yet it's critically important. And as I said, there are the other objectives. Biodiversity is critical, of course, pollution and so on. So we have to look at this issue and say, okay, transition has to be good enough, it's got to be ambitious enough, it's got to be urgent enough. Now, the platform actually ended up recommending that that kind of transition and transition finance would also be a sustainable investment. And the last thing I'm going to say is we also talked about the 40% of the economy that's low environmental impact, mainly the services sector, which in most cases is in need of finance to be greener, may not be going to be green, but at the moment it's lumped into the bucket with the impactful sectors. Now, what we said also in our report was that there's a lot that can be done voluntarily using the taxonomy. Doesn't have to be legislated. Companies could start to do the analysis, see where they need to do extra investments in order to do no significant harm to the environmental objectives, and they could indeed put forward a proposal with their transition plans and investments for those kinds of transitions. So I think that's it in a nutshell of what the platform recommended.
Thank you very much, Nancy. Indeed, I would like to remind all of us that not everything that needs to be done has to be legislated. And I think that is a particular case for transition finance, that indeed stakeholders can do more things than just disclosing, and which is already a very noble activity in just disclosing the information that are needed according to the law. I would go to Laurent now. I mean, CDP has done a lot of work on how taxonomy is being used on the ground. Laurent, can you tell us a little bit more what you have observed? And I understand that there is a new report coming out very soon.
Yes, there is a new report coming out tomorrow, and I encourage everybody to go and have a look at this report that CDP wrote together with Clarity AI, based on 1,700 company reporting to CDP in 2023, where we included for the first time ever some questions linked to the taxonomy. And we can see in terms of finding that companies that have set science-based emission reduction targets are demonstrating greater alignment in terms of CapEx. That's the number one and very strong conclusion of this report. A second finding is that companies with the higher taxonomy alignments overall are the companies that identify their revenue and spendings as part of their transition plan using the taxonomy, and those which validated the science-based targets. So it is very fundamental in the transition plan to calculate the percentage linked to the revenue and CapEx, and to have this as a reference basis to work going forward. And we obviously, it comes with no surprise that only 11% of the revenue of those 1,700 companies are aligned with the taxonomy, and 12% of the CapEx are aligned with taxonomy. So there is a lot of work to do, but it's the first basis that needs to be. It's going to be the benchmark, that we need to use in the future. And so this report is coming out tomorrow, and is going to be on the you can access that on the CDP website or the Clarity AI website. So that's for now, that's what I would say, and I think it's an important first element of analysis so far.
Thank you very much, Laurent. I mean, we are certainly very keen to read that report. I would also have a question for Ignacio. From the Iberdrola's perspective, taxonomy covers a number of activities, in particular in the energy sector and in the utility sector that are relevant. How useful and practical is it for you to use taxonomy when you have conversations with the financial sector, with the banks, with the investors? I mean, do you use it as a useful piece of information, not only about where you stand today, but in particular, since we talk about transition finance, what your intentions are?
Well, in this case, I think we started the transition in 2000. So we moved 24 years ago in this world. What we have seen during this during this very, very long period is that there were no any kind of a standard in the figures or in the rules. So during these 24 years, we have increased our investments mainly in networks and in renewables, achieving the level of that we are the world leader in wind energy, and also being one of the big players in terms of networks. These two main activities, taking account that in the November 2022 strategic plan, we include that we are going to invest 47 billion euros during the period 2023-2025, on which 90% is aligned with the taxonomy. So this means that in general, a huge part of our business comply with the taxonomy. And let's say since 2000, a huge part of the investments we do comply with the current taxonomy. So we have been, let's say, a leader, or we have innovate, and the taxonomy is quite close to the things we have been doing. The other element of the taxonomy, and in our talks with banks or with the community, with investors, what we are presenting them in some cases is for the financing we are going to do out of Europe, taking account that in some countries it's difficult to find anything similar to the taxonomy. What we are presenting to the different partners is to consider the EU taxonomy as a reference to identify which kind of capex will be eligible from a green bond perspective, for example.
That's very encouraging. Thank you very much, Ignacio. Wilfried, I will turn now to you. Banks are now very active, and they are actively preparing for the disclosures on taxonomy that will start next year. This year, as we know, we have already seen disclosures by the corporates. I would like to get a little bit better understanding whether what I said earlier, which is that taxonomy is obviously an important disclosure tool, how the bank can use taxonomy going beyond disclosures, and whether there are any intentions at the bank to use taxonomy for driving decisions about portfolio compositions, about how the taxonomy can enter your discussion at the strategic level, what needs to be done in the future, in the near future, and if so, how?
Yeah. Well, at this moment, the taxonomy is not used as a transition tool, but it is used as part of transition tools. There is the element, of course, that it has created a unique language for bankers and investors. It helps us to evaluate the companies we want to finance. The thing is that, and it was mentioned before, it reflects what is already green to a certain extent, and it doesn't capture the whole economy. The discussion, the element was mentioned earlier on. But on the other hand, we are evaluating the companies in every sector on, are they leading, are they laggards, or who is in between? And there, the taxonomy and the reporting we get on the taxonomy is, of course, a very important element, but it's one of the elements, together with their strategy, their commitment, what is happening in real thing. It allows us also, this taxonomy, it allows us also to help and to work with other banks, for instance, and with our clients. We have created, with Snam, for instance, an energy company in Italy, in September, they have launched a taxonomy-aligned transition bond of 500 million, which allows them to invest or have money to invest in renewable energy, energy efficiency, carbon reduction, but also the renewable of their gas infrastructure. So in that way, yes, it is part of the transition tools we have.
That's great. Well, colleagues, I mean, I think that there are some good news that we hear. And Nancy, I mean, you have made some of these proposals 2 years ago, and I hope that it is also music to your ears, that there are some encouraging signs. At least there seems to be a consensus on the panel that taxonomy can indeed be a useful tool for transition as well. Let us turn to the third building block, which is to explore other tools going beyond taxonomy and how to use them. Because when we talk about transition finance, it's always nice to hear general discussion about transition finance, but I always like to get some details and being concrete. So this third cluster is really about exploring the different tools and instruments that are at disposal that either companies have or financial sector should design that could help both the companies and the financial sector, such as green bonds, setting the targets, obviously the transition plan specifically. And I would start with you, Ignacio. I mean, you are representing a company in the energy sector, and as we all know, the energy sector is a perfect example of a sector that faces the most significant challenges with transition. What are the other tools, apart from taxonomy, that the companies in the energy sector or your company are using? And I mentioned the transition plans. I mean, what is your experience with the transition plans? How difficult is it for you to put together a credible, robust transition plan?
Yeah, well, if we move to Iberdrola's financial strategy, this has always been ruled by prudence in terms of solvency ratios and diversification of the different sources of financing, promoting a sustainable growth path. In the last year, we are clearly prioritizing the ESG finance to be so consistent with the group's strategy, vision, and values, and we are doing it not only for the parent company side, but as I was commenting, but also locally from the different geographies and subsidiaries where we get external financing. In terms of Iberdrola, we are mainly financing through the international capital markets. Around 75% of the total debt comes from bonds, followed by our global banks, around 15%, and the rest normally through supranational entities like the European Investment Bank, who has been supporting our investments in the last 25 years. For us, sustainability represents a philosophy which is integrated in the whole group. This is why our financing strategy is clearly focused on green and sustainability financing, prioritizing green financing in long-term debt instruments. As such, in terms of transparency, Iberdrola has a strong reporting and disclosure system on sustainability risk, being a pioneer in the implementation of the latest recommendations of the task force on climate-related financial disclosure. Moreover, the Iberdrola green financing transactions are subject to the Iberdrola's framework for green financing, which is aligned with IGMA. We have been using IGMA during many years, since the first bond in 2024, for the green bond, or using the principles and only excluding assets and activities eligible under the European Union taxonomy. Use of proceeds, I think this is one of the most relevant pillars, strictly reporting, external verification, and strict standards for the eligibility of activities and assets, together with a full alignment to the company strategy, are high valued by ESG investors, and it guarantees assurance and transparency on how many tons of CO2 they have contributed to avoid with their investments. As of today, following this strategy, Iberdrola is a pioneer and world leader in green and sustainability financing, with a volume of transactions carried out at the group level that exceeds the 50 billion euros. We are the largest private corporate issuer of green bonds worldwide, with more than 18 billion euros issued since 2014. We are also pioneers in green loans from bank and development institutions, with almost 12 billion euros. In 2017, Iberdrola was the world's first energy company to sign a green loan. 1 year later, we signed the first corporate green loan in Latin America. In addition, we are borrowers of the largest green loan ever lent by the Spanish ICO, is the official credit institution. and one of the European companies with higher volumes in green loans with the European Investment Bank. In addition, the group has formalized credit lines subject to sustainability criteria for 15 billion euros in those transactions. We are linking the conditions of the facilities to the fulfillment of indicators related to the company contribution to the sustainability development goals for 2030, such as development of new renewable assets or the promotion of universal access to energy.
Thank you very much, Ignacio. Can I just ask you a complementary question? We have developed some tools and instruments such as the green bonds, climate benchmarks for the investors. Do you think that the policymakers need to do more in terms of helping the markets with designing new instruments and tools, or should we simply leave it now to the market to invent these solutions themselves?
Well, I think we have, in some cases, we have to leave the market work. Because one of the considerations from the companies we have to do is just to hear the investors. We are selling bonds to investors, so investors have anything to say. Not everything has to be regulated, and the range of instruments will be defined in combination. So in our case, also we have do some innovative, innovative transactions. We did a green convertible bond, but to do all these things, we have to be in contact with investors and to find the path to do these kind of instruments.
Thank you. Again, from the European Commission perspective, I certainly confirm that there are no further legislative proposals being done on this front. We have asked the European Banking Authority to explore, again, what could be done about the green loans, for instance, for example. But at our end, we certainly do not have any intentions now to put any further legislative proposals on the tools and instruments supporting transition finance at this current juncture. Laurent, I will now go to you. There has been a lot of talk about, how a robust, credible transition plan should look like, and I obviously observe all the discussions in Dubai now. What are the views of the CDP? Can you tell us a little bit more? What are the key ingredients for a credible, robust transition plan that you would expect, to see, if not now, at least in the very near future?
So we identified 21 questions to build a credible transition plan, which are regrouped under 9 subcategories: financial planning, target setting, governance, risk and opportunities, auditing of the scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 by a third party. So we have this in a document that can be shared to anybody sending mail to CDP, and this is public information. And on this basis, we made some analysis and some really, I wouldn't say alarming analysis, because it's the first of their kind and they will have to be used as a reference information. In 2022, we analyzed the transition plan of 4,100 companies who say that they had a transition plan while reporting to the climate change questionnaire of CDP. And in fact, we only had 1% of all those companies having a credible transition plan, meaning that those 1% responded to the 21 questions. That was at the global level. When we made an analysis more dedicated to the European markets in 2023, we made this analysis with Oliver Wyman, and based on 1,500 companies, and 50% of them told us that they had a transition plan. And when we looked at this transition plan to the detail by matching to the 21 question, we only saw that 5% of them had both 1.5 approved targets and a credible transition plan, not responding to the 100% of the question, to at least 2/3 of the question, so to 66% of the 21 questions. And this was only representing a group of 5%. So there are lots of gaps between the announcement and the announcement and what the companies say they are doing, and in reality what they are doing. And when we digged a bit more into the detail, the financial planning question was the one that was the worst responded, because, and this is one of the most important questions, how are you going to finance this huge transition plan that you have? And we had very few information in this respect of this financial planning question, which is a bit worrying because, and probably the taxonomy will help organization have more, thorough and more precise element of response in terms of how they are going to finance a transition, because we know that the main problem now is the transition financing. I just would like to remind that we estimate at 4% of the world GDP, so $4 trillion US dollar per year up to 2050, the cost of the transition. And we see very clearly that the company, instead of investing massively in the transition, they prefer to cash in huge profit. We saw last year that 2022 was the highest ever year of profit for listed company on the market and of dividend payment, which this is a big problem, because instead of cashing in or instead of paying huge dividend, those companies should invest massively in the transition. And they just don't do that. So they need to follow the transition plan. They need to have the taxonomy element. They need to have some piece of the puzzle that we are seeing now clearly being implemented in Europe. And it needs to be used at the global level to help finance shift into the right direction.
Thank you very much, Laurent. Wilfried, I will turn to you. I mean, we obviously know that the investment needs related to transition are really huge. They're massive. What is BNP Paribas doing to scale up the impact, and what kind of instruments and tools you are using to promote transition finance so that you are moving the needle? Can you tell us a little bit more?
Sure. First of all, I'd like to say I'm now 8 years into the sustainability topic, and what I've seen with the EU Sustainable Finance Action Plan and the taxonomy has clearly moved the needle also internally. We have been working on sustainability for more than 12, 13 years, but the acceleration has come, and we've seen departments that before were not involved suddenly get involved very, very intensively. And I see, mainly on top of the fact that it has now been part of the strategy and the governance and the KPIs, I see 3 main levers that have been created to accompany our customers, and 3 main important elements. First of all, it's the commitment of us as a bank, strategically communicated to the market. On the negative side, I would say it is how to reduce in 10 hard to abate sectors the carbon intensity. That's part of our net zero commitment. Combined with hard figures that we're going to reduce our financing of oil exploration and production with 80% by 2030. So this is reducing the negative impact. On the positive impact, we have set KPIs to have available 200 billion euros for accompanying our customers in their transition to a low carbon economy. And this is nothing else that we have done in the past 200 years. It is any industrial revolution, and this is one, to accompany our customers in this transition. So this is one, commitment. 2, it's expertise. We've created a low carbon transition group. It's a group of 150 plus global bankers that talk to the biggest companies in the world and asking them about not only their reporting, but also how are they dealing with the transition, and where can we do what we would do best is financing in this transition. For this, we have a specialized sustainable capital markets team of 40 people and a data analytics team that monitors where are we going with our commitment to go to net zero by 2050 with targets by 2030. So that's 2. So commitment, expertise. And then 3, it's the tools. It is sustainable finance tools. We have been working with ICMA and the Loan Markets Association for the past years. We've been working with our customers to develop accordingly green bonds, social bonds, sustainability-linked bonds. And BNP Paribas, thanks to this early commitment and to the resources we've set behind it, we are leading in this kind of financing. And you see it evolve. You see that those people find new combinations, new possibilities to create either use of proceeds products where the money is used to invest in green activities, either sustainability-linked products where KPIs are set, where the importance again is if you finance a steel company with sustainability-linked loans, what are the targets? Are they material? Are they followed? Are they monitored? Are they reported, etc.? So yes, the tools are there. I think overall, one could say the financing is clearly out there. The challenge is, how do you label them to avoid that investors get a little bit confused in, okay, is this now green? Is it now transition? So I think, therefore, again, it's important to have clearly these definitions there.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned your own commitments. There have been many calls from different stakeholders that these plans need to be clear also, not only when it comes to long-term objectives, but also kind of over the short-term and medium-term. What needs to happen, not only, let's say, over the next 25 years, you know, to what extent
Definitely.
are you able to articulate what needs to happen, you know, also over the next, let's say, next 5 years? And this is, by the way, the most critical period. During which, especially when you have to accompany those companies that are facing the most significant challenges. How do you do that?
2050, it's a long time from now. And therefore also, if you're a member of the Net Zero Banking Alliance, you are expected to formulate targets the latest by 2030. So what we started with 2 years ago already was, for the most impactful sectors, oil and gas, power, so electricity production, and automotive, we had set targets already for 2025. We now updated to 2030. We've now added 4 sectors, which the 3 sectors, it's steel, it's aluminium, and it's cement. Next year, 2024, we will come with targets, 2030 targets, for what I would call the more difficult sectors, which is agriculture, shipping, aviation, and then real estate, both residential and commercial real estate. And there is a dedicated team of data analysts using artificial intelligence to calculate where are we. It's not like towards our own benchmark. We're using the International Energy Agency's net zero scenario to see, are we below that line? For some we are below because we started early. For some we are above, and we know that we need to go into dialogue with the customers.
Thank you very much. Nancy, what I mean, as the EIB, what does the EIB expect from companies in terms of transition and resilience plans?
Well, I think the first thing to say is that we had to go through a bit of a transition ourselves, I think, to really bring climate in. And that's exactly what BNP Paribas was just saying. It is a transformation of the bank itself into the climate bank. And in doing that, of course, we realize that it's not about us being Paris aligned. It's about supporting our clients and our customers and our countries that we work in all around the world to be Paris aligned. And of course, it depends on the sectors, whether you're looking at 2050 or whether, you know, like the energy sector, which has to be decarbonized earlier. So what we found is that the most important thing, perhaps, and in fact, it's one of the MDB's 6 building blocks, is building block 4, which is support your clients. In the end, it all comes back to that. If we do not support our clients, then we will not be able to deliver on our targets, but we also won't be able to be Paris aligned in all our financing activities. So as part of our climate bank roadmap, so we have a climate strategy. I think it's important that we have a climate strategy, and then we have a climate bank roadmap, which is a kind of big implementation plan. And one of the things we did was set up a Paris alignment for clients, which is partly corporates and partly financial intermediaries that we work with, whether it's banks or fund managers. For the corporates, they're screened for either high impacts, high greenhouse gas emissions, or being operating in a context of high vulnerability to climate change, either their own operations or that they might have creating a high vulnerability, you know, around their business to other people or other companies and so on. So whether they're screened in for one or the other, or possibly both, they have to have a transition plan or a resilience plan. And the transition plan has to be a 1.5 degrees compatible plan. We do not dictate exactly what targets and so on they should use, but we have a lot of information about science-based targets. We work with CDP and others. The really important thing is that all these plans have to be public. We felt that the most important thing we could do as the EIB was to ensure that the companies thought it through well enough that they're able to publish these. And I would agree that the next step is obviously how are they followed? The next step is obviously how are they monitored? But for us, the most important thing was 1.5 degrees, resilience, and that they're made public. Now, if the company has a plan that isn't 1.5 degrees compatible at the moment, we say, okay, but then you have to explain publicly how you're going to get back on track. What are you going to do to bring your company transition plan to being compatible with the 1.5 degrees temperature goal? And then for financial intermediaries, for banks and fund managers and so on that we work with, we ask them to do TCFD reporting and to support that effort, really, to harmonise the best efforts and best practices. We felt that there was no need there to reinvent the wheel. Obviously, with the ESRS, the European Reporting Standards, coming, I think that will change. But at the moment, TCFD was what we asked for. The thing I want to say is, in terms of what we also ask is, we do work with other MDBs on how can we support Paris alignment. And this is going to be, I think, an ever increasing issue, including the issue of assurance. So one of the things I would say as a public bank is that what we have to do is work in partnership with other MDBs, with people like CDP, with other banks like BNP Paribas and others, and of course in the platform with yourselves and all the other members of the platform to see how we can learn together, because we are really out of time, as we know from the global stock take here in Dubai.
Thank you very much, Nancy. I think that this would conclude the third cluster. Ignacio, you still would like to follow up? Oh, this is Laurent, sorry. It's Laurent.
Yes, please. I mean, I just wanted to say something that right now there is the corporate sustainability due diligence directive being discussed in Trilogue. There is a huge lobbying for financial institutions not to be included in this directive. And this directive is the generating fact, asking corporations and financial institutions if they are included in the directive to have a transition plan aligned to 1.5. It's not the CSRD which is asking this, it's the CSDDD. And I would highly encourage the European Union to maintain the banks and the financial institution in the CSDDD. And there is also another directive being discussed now, which is the Capital Requirement Directive, which is also talking about transition plan for financial institutions. So definitely the financial institution needs to be concerned by transition plan by law, because they have a huge impact on their client. As it was said now, they can, if they have a transition plan to achieve, they will ask their investing company or the company they lend money to also have a transition plan. So it's fundamental that they are included in this text.
Thank you, Laurent. I would like to now go to the fourth cluster, which is a very important one, which is how to bring the SMEs into the game of sustainable finance, into the game of transition finance, because also SMEs have huge needs for transition themselves. And by the way, also the role of SMEs for supporting the larger companies through the supply chain. I mean, it's very fundamental. Now, we hear a lot of complaints that, the SMEs have not really been included into the game because, as we know, there was a deliberate choice not to impose any transparency requirements on SMEs. And this remains the case, and this will remain the case also in the near future, because we wanted to avoid any burdens on the SMEs. At the same time, the financial sector complains that there is a lack of data and lack of information that would be relevant for the financial market participants. So there is a certain challenge here. Wilfried,
Yeah.
How do you cope with this challenge?
Well, let's be honest. The SMEs, the small and medium-sized enterprises, are the backbone of the European economy. Yeah, that's maybe a normal saying, but it is true. And if you see, they don't have a CSR department. They don't have a dedicated team working on this. And we see in our dialogue with SMEs that some indeed see what is happening and they see the opportunity there, but there are many out there that are dealing with today's issues. And there is going to be the trickle-down effect of the CSRD reporting for the larger companies. Some will be part of a supply chain, as you mentioned. Also, we as a bank, we also reach out to those SMEs to better understand where they are themselves regarding ESG performance. Because for us, I mean, we're doing our job with the money of our clients. So we need to know where are we investing in. Yeah? And this means also understanding technologies, understanding where some companies are going. And therefore, we've done a little bit the same like we've done for large companies, but on another scale. For instance, in Belgium, we have for more than 10 years what we call the Green Desk. It's a team of 10 people, engineers and bankers, and they talk to companies here in Belgium, so not the big corporates, and they ask them, okay, first of all, where are you? How can we accompany you, etc. So this we have in different home markets, France and Italy and Luxembourg. We have, for instance, in Poland, a dedicated team working just with farmers. And now we've created, like we've done for the large companies, the low carbon transition group, we've now created this transversal platform to exchange the expertise and to make sure that our relationship managers that work with smaller companies also can flag not only the risks, because we will be assessing not only the big companies, what we're doing now on ESG performance, but gradually it will go down to the smaller companies. At the same time, it's also a question of identifying the opportunities and demonstrating that also in the sectors, there are opportunities out there. And that's the most important one. Get away from the tick the box and please demonstrate that there are opportunities in every sector.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Wilfried. Nancy, question also to you. What does the EIB group do to support SMEs transition towards sustainability?
Yes, thank you. Well, it's very important for both of the big parts of the EIB group, which is the bank and the EIF, the fund. Obviously, in the bank, most of what we're doing is lending to SMEs, usually through our partner banks that we lend to, who then on-lend to SMEs. And obviously in the EIF, they are investing in SMEs and micro enterprises through funds. So both are really important. And both are part of our target to exceed our overall financing, more than 50% to be green. And when we say that, we mean climate action and environmental sustainability, which of course means all 6 objectives of the taxonomy. And we are implementing the taxonomy in a phased manner to report that green finance. So, but we were doing it before the taxonomy came along, and we had created something called climate windows in our lending for SMEs, which was of quite a lot of interest to our banking partners. These are now called green windows. So they're basically, we do green loans sometimes where they're dedicated for energy efficiency or renewable energy, but we also have loans where we're lending for SME financing, and a certain percentage is going to be for green finance. And it's then for the bank the intermediary bank, I mean, to choose with us, depending on their pipeline and their market, what size of green window they want to include. Now, one of the results of the decision on Article 8 was that those banks can't report that SME financing, at least not in the GAR, the Green Asset Ratio. But of course, they do have to report it in what's called the BTAR, the Banking Book Taxonomy Alignment Ratio. So in fact, what's happening is that banks are asking SMEs questions about it. And to be honest, banks have always done this. For example, if we are lending for electric vehicles, the SME has to say that it's for electric vehicles. If it's for insulating a building, the SME has to say it's for insulating a building. It has to be done in obviously a way that's appropriate for the size of SME. You know, an SME that has 2 employees is unlikely to be able to provide the same level of information as an SME that has 200 employees. But still, for those kind of green loans, and I don't think we need a definition of green loans to have green loans. They're already out there based on the taxonomy. You do need some information, and it has to be suited to the size of the SME. And then banks can and want to report that. So how do we help them? Well, there's 2 ways we help them. One is that we have put in place technical assistance, both inside and outside, because we see that a lot of our partner banks actually wanted to have some technical assistance from us in developing a pipeline for green lending to SMEs, or what were the opportunities in their countries. So that's been very, very important. And then we have developed funded using EU funds, a green tracking tool called the Green Tracker, which is basically available to all banks who can use it to track their green lending, not just to SMEs, maybe to small municipalities and other types of lending, but most of it is to SMEs. And this is being brought together with the taxonomy so that to start with, at least the substantial contribution criteria can be established. So these are the kind of things that we're doing. And of course, at the EIF, very important as well. They're doing all sorts of support for different funds, a lot of really, really interesting and innovative stuff, which is more the equity side. So both equity and lending for SMEs, we believe, is super important. And I just want to add outside as well. We are the EU's development bank, so we work in countries all around the world that are low or middle income. And there we see a huge demand from local banks. And if we look at accelerating green finance in those developing countries, for SMEs at least, most of the time it will be through their own local banks. And therefore, if we can support those banks in developing green products and financing SMEs, we will be doing a big step forward in the green financing in those countries.
Oh, indeed, Nancy. Thank you. Wilfried, do you want to complement?
Yeah, I completely align. I think it's not only about finding sustainability linked loans for SMEs, but it is also how can we provide the equity financing. And we do have, for instance, with the Solar Impulse Foundation created a fund to invest in innovative startups in this space. And we're working with microfinance institutions to support not only in Europe, but also in countries in development, entrepreneurship like that. So it's a mix of all those elements that where we can contribute.
This will,
and if I could just add one little thing that I forgot to mention, but it's incredibly important. SMEs are often very vulnerable to climate change impacts, and that's actually quite hard to think, how can we as a financial institution help with that? But it's not going to get any easier, so we need to work together in partnership again to see how we can do that. It's one thing to finance them to buy an electric vehicle. It's another thing to think, how can we finance them to become more resilient?
This will indeed have to be a collaborative effort, and I think that, again, structures that we have, such as the platform on sustainable finance in the EU and many other structures, will be needed. Just to say that, in order to reduce the burdens on SMEs, because, we also have to realize that they are being approached by different templates from different, stakeholders, the banks, the investors. So, as you know, EFRAG is developing a common EU standard, voluntary reporting standard for SMEs that would hopefully address this problem of SMEs getting different templates, which I think is a burden on its own, despite them being not subject to the regulatory requirements. Colleagues, we are coming to the end. We have prepared these 4 clusters. I hope that the audience has enjoyed the conversation so far. However, I have still prepared for a possibility that we would still have some time remaining, and for that we didn't prepare with the speakers. And this is some kind of surprise question for all of you. Let's improvise a little bit. And the question is, the EU cannot transition the world alone. And I talked about the need to move the needle and to move the needle at scale. So since we have 2 minutes left, can each of you tell me in 30 seconds what, in your view, would be the most important policy action to scale up transition finance at the global level? And I would start maybe now with Ignacio.
Well, I think we have to integrate the states. I think this is anything we see from the investor side, that the percentage of green investors or ESG investors in terms of financing in the state is much lower than what is happening in Europe, and I think we have to convince, or we have to have the states also in this boat, as Europe is.
Thank you very much, Laurent.
So I think what the European is building with the different directive is definitely a vitrine for the world. I think that the double materiality reporting standard are going to have a tremendous effect on the supply chain outside of Europe. So let's count also on this. It's a fundamental aspect of things. And then how can we roll out at the international level? Definitely the banks and the financial institution must be included in the CS DDD regulation, because they must build transition plan, and that's fundamental. It will have a trickle-down effect on all their portfolio, and sometimes the portfolio is not in Europe, is a company in Latin America or in Asia, so it will be very powerful to include them in the text, because it's now Money time, it's the trilogue discussion being happening now. So it's very important that they remain in the text.
Thank you very much, Wilfried.
Maybe to respond to that last topic, which is not the topic of today, but I'm happy to share our experience with due diligence legislation BNP Paribas has already for many years in France. But on the question of aligning or the role internationally to roll out transition finance, I think there is an element in terms of alignment with other initiatives. I understand in the past few days, the Market Authority of Singapore has announced or has clarified its position on a taxonomy and on transition plan. And then I would really appreciate what you said earlier. The basis has been laid, the regulation, the framework is there. It's the moment to roll up the sleeves. It's tripling renewable energy, it's doubling on energy efficiency. It's clear where we have to go. So let's do it.
Thank you very much. Nancy, you are the last, but not least.
So yes, what do I hope for in terms of rolling out transition finance globally? Well, I think the first thing is that we actually have to listen to how serious the science is right now. When we talk about 1.5 degrees, it's not because it's a nice number, it's because we're talking about staying within a safe climate for people to live on in the future. And so we need to be honest that there's a lot of transition finance being talked about that is not actually either ambitious or urgent enough. The emissions have to fall very steeply in this decade, 2030. Whether we're talking about 2040, 2050, doesn't matter if we don't get the emissions right in this decade, and particularly in energy, where we already know how to make low carbon electricity. We need to move away from unabated fossil fuels immediately. The EIB did that from 2019, and we need to help other parts of the world to do that. And for that, they're going to need more concessionality and they're going to need more finance. But we cannot fool ourselves that we have a lot more time. We don't. So the transition has to be now and it has to be really ambitious.
Yeah, if I
Nancy.
may the chair of COP28 listen to your words.
Thank you, Laurent. Colleagues, many thanks for this very insightful panel. I think that I cannot hope and beat any of the conclusions that you have made, and especially Nancy with her last words. I would like to thank you for your time, for your efforts, for the work that you are doing on the ground. I hope that the audience has enjoyed this conversation, which I am, by the way, sure will continue in the month and years to come. So big thank you. Have a nice evening.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.